Generations ago, Arthuin was rocked by the Great War. The conflict came to an end with the Mage Fire, which left the Central Lands a smoking ruin. The few survivors of the tribes fled to the edges of the world, and none dare set foot into what became known as the Bane, until now. For the tribes have gradually recovered and rebuilt. With growing populations, they push out once again from their homelands. Scouts have already entered the Bane, bringing back tales of magical artifacts, of strange temples, of lost treasures and valuable resources. And so the tribes mobilize their forces. The barbarians of the north, the elf lords of the west, the men of the south. Rumors grow of the rise of a necromancer to the east. Even the dwarves are stirring from their caverns and mines, and orc bands now roam the borders of the Bane. War is coming. Are you prepared?
Hi there, and welcome to this new playlist on the Dragon's Teeth channel, Bane Wars. Yes, as you may have seen if you've been following particularly the Fantastic Battles uploads, we've decided to set up a campaign using the Fantastic Battles rules, and what you heard at the start there is the basic setup for this campaign. So if you imagine we've got this large central area in the continent, which is conveniently sort of hex shaped and each of the edges is a border with a different tribe. So for centuries this central area has been ignored and abandoned following this sort of magical apocalypse that went on there. The place is just desolate. The tribes retreated out, but now the tribal populations are growing, so they're beginning to encroach again upon this central area. So there's the potential for at least 8 sides in this campaign, one entering in on each side of this central hex. And the first part of the game is going to be about exploration. Each of the tribes has a 1,000-point army under the Fantastic Battle rules, plus commanders and generals and scouts, and they're making their way from their homeland into this central area, initially to explore. So they're going to find things like ruined temples, ancient cities, mountains, perhaps with seams of gold or mithril or something like that in them. Basically, there's lots of little things to find, magic items, old spell books and all that sort of stuff. And at some point in their wanderings, they're going to bump into the army of another tribe. Now, this is all going to be hidden movement. So the umpire takes the movement orders from each of the tribes, plots them on the big map, tells each commander what they've found, and at some point says, oh right, there's a dwarf army just over the hill. So then the armies have the option to parley, to ignore each other, or to go into battle, and that's when we take things to the tabletop. So of course for the tabletop we're using the FB rules. We are going to make 1 or 2 tweaks, mostly in terms of the spells and the wizards, because we thought it would be nice to have the wizards reflect the makeup of the army. So if we've got an undead army, for example, which happens to be the one that I'm running, then we've got a necromancer as the wizard. Now he or she is going to have spells like, of course, raise undead. There'll be some horrible sort of curse type spells, that sort of thing. If you've got an elf army, then their magic user will be more akin to a druid, say. So their spells are going to revolve around perhaps bringing trees to life, or tracking, or moving through forests, that kind of stuff. So in that sense, as well as the units being tailor-made, which is one of the strengths of Fantastic Battles, we're going to apply the same a little bit to magic users as well. So we're actually going to have a test game this Sunday to try some of those new spells out, because of course you've got to get that fine balance with spells in fantasy games. You don't want a sort of fireball that goes and it's just like a little firework and doesn't even reach the other side. By the same token, you don't want one figure on the table being able to go boom and blast half the opposing army with one spell. So we're always looking for that balance. That's the tabletop rules, which are fairly straightforward. Of course, we also have to consider the wider campaign rules. So I've drawn on the campaign rules from FB. I've drawn on Tony Bath's Hyborian Age campaign. I bought his book a little while back, which is full of great information. If you're looking at setting up a campaign, I thoroughly recommend that. There's also a book by Henry Hyde, I think it is, which I haven't seen yet, but I will probably get at some point. By all accounts, that also gives you a lot of good advice for setting up campaigns. So we're drawing on all of those, plus of course we're going to be adding in some homebrew rules, and I imagine there will be a lot of tweaking as we go along. So for that reason, I'm not going to go into great details on the campaign rules at the start, partly because I was thinking I could sit down and work out loads of different things, put in lots of tables and ideas. We might have a situation, for example, I might think where a totally mad situation where a player wants a giant eagle to pick up a little hobbit who's got some magic item, fly him all the way across to the other side of the Bane, to the other side of the map, to do something with this magic item. Crazy idea, I know. So I could work that out, and I could think, right, what's the average speed of the eagle? If it's carrying a hobbit, how much does a hobbit weigh? Yeah, we get into the, you know, the unladen swallow, the velocity of the unladen swallow sort of territory. I could work all sorts of things out like that, and then no one does it. So the approach I'm going to take is, if someone does come up with an idea like that, I'll work it out then, and we can resolve it as we go along. If by the end of the campaign everything has gone well, we've ironed out all the little wrinkles, I may well look at publishing that as a campaign guide or as a set of rules for fantasy campaigns, but we'll see how that goes. What I am going to be doing is putting regular reports here on how the campaign is going. So we'll start today, as we've seen, we've got the setting, we've got some ideas about how the initial campaign is going to work, and then as we go through, we can follow the campaign, we'll do reports on some of the battles, and we'll see how it all fits together. Having established the setting, we're going to look at building some armies. We're going to be doing that this Sunday at the club, so we'll see how that goes in a moment. Basically, each player starts with 1,000 points to spend on whatever type of troops they wish. Well, having said that, each player chooses a particular tribe. So I think we've got like barbarians, we've got the undead, the vampires I mentioned, we've got some interesting high elves, but they're not noble and pure ones, they're quite nasty, evil high elves. That's an interesting one. We've got a lizard man army, and of course we've got our usual orcs, goblins, elves, and so on. So we've got a nice mix, but it's also good that as well as taking those, what may be a bit of an obvious trope or stereotype, the players are already starting to put a bit of their own spin on them, which of course is something that Fantastic Battles is great for, because you can pretty much have a made-to-measure army. As long as things don't clash too much, then, you know, it could work. Basically, if you can justify it to the umpire, you can get away with having a mix of dragons, evils, undead, and paladins. Well, maybe not that, but you know what I mean. We're not just restricted to the same old, same old. So I'll go into more detail later on in the next upload about how an army is built, the nuts and bolts, and I'll take you through my undead army and what sort of units I've got in that. What we'll look at now is the Sunday session, where we get together to start really working out starting positions, what type of armies we've got, what the command structure of those armies is going to be, because that's going to play an important role. And also we're going to run a test game, as I said, just to look at some of those new spells and to make sure that everything is okay there. So let's take a look. So the scenario for today's game is these two armies have happened upon this hidden valley, and in that valley there are 4 ruins along the centre of the board here. These are the ruins that I bought recently. Unfortunately not had time to paint them yet, and each of these ruins contains possibly an item or artifact, possibly a monster or some sort of guardian creature. So it's basically a race to the ruins to retrieve whatever might be in there. And we're working on, I think it's about 1200 points a side. So that's the basic setup for the game. You can see the two armies laid out now. Not a lot of terrain we used for this one. We wanted to keep it fairly clear. I did use one of my new rivers. And this is the human army, which has got a couple of nice airships there. That's something new. And also some units of dwarves and ogres as well, quite interestingly. And they're playing against the undead, which have got some heavy cavalry. There's some skeleton archers there, mostly made up of skeletons, sort of heavy and light skeleton units. Some zombies, of course, thrown in, and a couple of units of bats and some wolves as well. Mark's playing the human army, and off we go. As I say, this is pretty much a race for the ruins, and this is where I came a bit unstuck because, yeah, on the left flank here I've got some bats and some wolves and some light cavalry, but Mark's airships, bang, they're pretty much straight on the first set of ruins there. And I've got my cavalry on the right flank, so they were moving a bit quicker. They actually managed to reach both sets of ruins. So what each ruin contained was basically 4 ruins. So there were 2 monsters and 2 items. One was a treasure chest of 500 gold pieces, and the other one was a magic sword. Now, with the creatures, we thought this might be interesting. One was a giant bear, and the other was a unit of vengeful spirits. So they would act in a random way unless the side that found them could take control of them. Now, with the dwarf army, or the human army, they were able to try and control the bear, and the undead or necromancer's army, of course, was able to try and control the spirits. That was just a simple die roll. We said we have to have the magic user there, and on a 4 to 6 they managed to control that monster unit, so that becomes part of your army. If the magic user failed to control the monster, then it's just random movement. We just throw a die to see what direction it moves in, and it's just going to charge and attack whatever is in its way. So that was a nice little dynamic. We probably won't do that so much for the campaign, or we might have one ruin on the table. But it gave us a nice little test of that exploration aspect that we want to build into it. The other nice thing with this setup was the difference in the armies. Mark had a lot more missile troops than me. In fact, he had quite a huge amount of missile troops. So he managed to get a lot of good shots off, but when I actually managed to close in, then that pretty much wiped most of his crossbow dwarves and that sort of thing out. But it was quite tense. In fact, I'll say it was very evenly matched. The biggest struggle was the heavy cavalry fighting the ogre units. They almost pretty much destroyed each other. The cavalry just won it in the end, but then got wiped out when they turned to charge some of the crossbow dwarves. So it all felt very balanced, although the armies were very different in makeup. Now, we didn't really get much of a chance to test out the new spells. The magic users they seemed a bit reluctant to go forward this time, so we never really got much spell action going on. So we'll make that a feature of the next game. In fact, I think we've got another battle planned for tonight. That mammoth there, that's the stand-in for the great bear. Need to get some bear figures and some other monsters as well. We called it a draw in the end, as each side successfully looted 2 temples and at least had some of their army standing at the end. Casualties were quite high, but again, this was really one of those line up and charge kind of games. So in the actual campaign, we think that will settle down a bit. And also, of course, just because your unit is dispersed in fantastic battles doesn't mean that they're all dead. So I think in the Tony Bath book, there's a mechanism for working out how many of your units are actually killed, or how many casualties you actually take, and how many in effect you still have alive to put into your next battle. This one flowed very nice, it all went very smoothly. Of course, we're getting more used to the rules now, we're not having to look things up quite so often. And overall, a nice balanced game with 2 very different armies, which again is what we're looking for, particularly in this campaign setting. That's the first upload in our new Bane Wars series then. If you'd like to follow that and keep an eye on how the campaign develops, please do click the subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. And I think for all of us, what we like with the campaign setting is it takes our games beyond that, just line up on opposite sides of the table and charge each other. And hopefully it's going to throw up a lot of interesting scenarios. There might be battles where one side has to hold a bridge or a particular terrain feature. It might be a battle where one side is trying to escape. We might get alliances form. We might get treachery halfway through the battle. Your ally might change sides. You know, there's sort of scope for all sorts of things. And the other thing as well is it doesn't necessarily have to work as a big battle, because it might well develop that one player says, actually, I want to take a small group of 30 of my orcs, and we just want to investigate this temple or something. So we could even run a skirmish game. Perhaps there's an opposing unit of elves are also exploring at the same time. So it gives us scope to go from the big campaign setting right down to skirmish setting. So yeah, we're looking forward to getting into it, and I hope you're looking forward to it and enjoy it as well. If you do have any comments, questions or suggestions, of course, as we go along, please do let me know. I'm sure we'll make loads of mistakes on the way, but you know, that's all part of the fun. Anyway, keep an eye out for part 2, Building the Army, and I'll see you soon.